I'm now joined by a very, very special guest here on CNN News 18. Professor Kishore Mahbubani is a distinguished fellow with the Asia Research Institute of the National University of Singapore, former Singaporean diplomat. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking with us. It is indeed a privilege to be speaking to you on such pressing matters as what we have seen over these last few days. And I want to start with the momentous events of yesterday, both in Israel as well as in Egypt. What do you make of it?
Well, I think the whole world is greatly relieved that the killing in Gaza has stopped. It's actually quite shocking to see every day 40 to 50 people being killed, random bombings, and people, starving, suffering from famine. I mean, this is not what modernity is all about. And of course, we all condemn the Hamas attacks on the innocent Israeli civilians, no question. We feel the pain of the Israeli people. But at the same time, there have to be limits also in warfare. And various UN and UN-related agencies made it very clear that international humanitarian law was being violated in Gaza. So I can tell you quietly, secretly, many people said, thank God, this has stopped.
But the question now is, will this peace last? Will the two parties, who are the main two parties to this war, Israel and Hamas, keep their end of the bargain? Or have President Trump and his administration folks sort of jumped the gun because they wanted this headline moment, they wanted this summit where you had world leaders singing praises of President Trump? Have they jumped the gun on this?
Well, I've been observing international affairs for 55 years. And I can tell you the one part of the world that I always hesitate to make any sort of strong, definitive judgments about is the Middle East. Because the Middle East will always surprise you with things. But at the same time, it's very sad to see that Israel, which is an amazing country, by the way, and has clearly emerged and become far more powerful as a result of the recent conflicts. It's demolished Hamas, it's destroyed Hezbollah, it's attacked Iran, it's attacked the Houthis. So it is, in military terms, it has done amazing things. And yet, at the end of the day, what any country needs is long-term strategic thinking. And if Israel wanted to secure a long-term strategic future for itself, it should seize this moment and achieve long-term peace with all its neighbors and enemies too. But unfortunately, and this is the sad truth, and Tom Friedman has written about this in his columns, Bibi Netanyahu, for personal reasons, wanted to keep the war going, because if the war ended, he might end up losing his job, he might end up going to jail. And it was very sad to see that Israel's long-term interests were to some extent being sacrificed for the sake of one man. And this is where I must say Donald Trump was a genius when he told the Israeli parliament, why don't you give the man a pardon? Give the man a pardon, Mr. President. Because Donald Trump was basically saying what I said, that the war was carrying on, not because it served Israel's long-term interest to do so. Every serious commentator has said there are no more military gains for Israel. Israel has won all the military wars it needs to win. What Israel doesn't have is a long-term strategic plan to secure its future. And here, what's amazing is that all of Israel's neighbors, and in fact, frankly, almost all the Muslim countries in the world are ready to establish relations with Israel. And the president of Indonesia said very loudly and very clearly in the United Nations in his speech, President Prabowo, I am ready to establish diplomatic relations with Israel as long as we have a two-state solution. And by the way, Indonesia is the world's largest Islamic country by far. And for the world's largest Islamic country to say we can work with Israel, so there's a tremendous. If Israel had the kind of long-term strategic thinkers like Rabin around, then frankly, Israel would seize this moment for peace. And as a friend of Israel, that's what I've been advising the Israelis. Seize this moment for peace. Don't go for this nickel and dime, bits of pieces of territory here, bits of territory there. They don't matter. At the end of the day, what you need to do is to secure the trust and confidence of your neighbors. And this is the best moment for Israel to do so, because it has demonstrated in an amazing way how militarily dominant it has become in the Middle East.
I do want to talk to you about President Trump, and he has sort of appended all the established rules of global diplomacy and global trade, certainly. And here in India, we've been having a bit of a difficult phase trying to, deal with this changed rules of engagement. It's a very transactional sort of diplomacy. What do you make, from your vantage, what do you make of how India has dealt with Trump? And if you were to advise Mr. Modi's government as to what can be done differently, what would your advice be?
Well, I think for a start, let's immediately acknowledge that Donald Trump is very, very unusual. He's completely different from every other of his predecessors. And while we can be very, very critical of some of his arbitrary actions, and incidentally, his arbitrary actions on tariffs, I think are very damaging even for the United States, as time will tell. But when it comes to issues of war and peace, it's actually amazing that President Donald Trump hates wars. I don't know, for whatever reason, he genuinely, deeply, sincerely hates wars. And that's wonderful for the world, that you have someone who hates wars. But as you were implying in your question also, that he's also someone who's very transactional and very focused on the issue of the day and not issues of 10 years from now. And I do know that the second Trump administration has created many shocks for India. In fact, I must say, personally, I've been amazed that India has been hit not once, not twice, not thrice, 4 times. Amazingly. Number one, the tariffs, and apparently because India imports Russian oil, it gets 50% tariffs. China imports far more Russian oil. No 50% tariffs. That's hit number one. Number two, the rehyphenation of India and Pakistan. And it's amazing to see the warmth that has developed within Pakistan and Donald Trump. And by the way, you just saw it in Sharm el-Sheikh also. And then you have thirdly, the H-1B visas. 75% of the successful applicants come from India. And then fourthly, you have the Chabahar port, on which the Trump administration, number one, Trump 1, waived the sanctions for dealing with Iran on Chabahar port. Trump 2, reimpose the sanctions. So I think this is a moment clearly that calls for deep reflection on the part of India. Very, very deep reflection. And I believe that India will certainly overcome these challenges, this big, powerful, strong country, sort of weak country. But it does need to figure out what is the best place for India to be in the 21st century when the whole global order is changing fundamentally. And as you know, in all my writings, I emphasize that the 21st century will be the Asian century. That's very, very clear. And in this new world that is emerging, right, the best position for India will clearly very soon become the third largest economy in the world. That's a given. India will be the number 3 power in the world, but it will be sadly way behind US and China soon. But the best place for India to be is to be an independent third pole in a multipolar world, neither close to the United States nor close to China, but independent. And as you know, that's not where Indian foreign policy has drifted towards in the last few years. So, in some ways, a moment like this, if it leads to a recalibration of India's position, it'd be good for India. And frankly, even the United States would actually like to deal with a much more independent Indian pole. It can be more effective and a better friend for United States than one that is just seen to be very close to the United States.
Let me just press you on that a little further, because clearly I think the defining story of not just our time currently, but certainly over the next 10, 20, 30 years is going to be this great power competition between the US and China. And like you said, over the last few years, the strategic logic was India is developing and moving much closer to the United States because for India, China is the bigger threat. It's in our neighborhood. There is a contested border. 5 years ago, we saw violent clashes along that border. So the logic was, in order for India to take on China, it needs the help of the United States. But that has been pushed back, for all the factors that you mentioned, the 4 factors that you mentioned. That idea has been pushed back quite severely in the last few months under President Trump. So when you say India should be independent of both America and China, how does India also navigate the pressures that come thereof, whether it is from the US, as we are seeing over these last few months, or the pressures that we saw from China on the trade front as well as on the military front a few years ago?
Well, by the way, you're absolutely right that the main defining geopolitical contest of our time is the US-China contest. And by the way, my book as China Won, which you see behind me, was published 5 years ago. And it said, it doesn't matter who becomes president of the United States, the US-China contest will accelerate. And sadly, my predictions have come true 5 years after the book was published. So that's going to be the defining contest. And therefore, India's got to decide where it stands in this defining contest. And you were absolutely correct in suggesting that in the last few years, India has drifted closer to the US and drifted away from China. But, I always believe that, geopolitics is a very cruel business. It's the most cruel business in the world. Unfortunately, it punishes illusions and rewards recognition of hard realities. And the hard reality is that China is going to become as powerful as the United States and possibly more powerful than the United States. And incidentally, I don't know how many people have noticed, something very significant happened to the US-China relationship a few months ago. And they have now achieved parity. Because in Joe Biden's administration, Anthony Blinken, Jake Sullivan said, okay, we can just apply pressure on China. What can the Chinese do? They cannot hit back at us. Well, the Chinese have now accumulated a series of options, and they can hit back and hurt the United States. And I don't know if you noticed this, the tone of the US-China relationship has changed significantly in the last few months. China has achieved parity with the United States. So many of the people who are pushing for India to move closer to the United States assume that the United States will always be number 1 and China would always be number 2. But, it's a different world. China is going to get stronger and stronger. But I want to emphasize that doesn't mean you must underestimate the United States, by the way. The United States will remain a formidable power in its own right, but also a formidable power that protects his own interests. And Donald Trump is just behaving rationally in saying, my goal is to make America great again. And frankly, if he can get a good business deal with the second largest economy in the world, and the Chinese economy is still 5 times bigger than India's economy, why won't he take that if it benefits the United States of America? And there are tremendous amount of synergies, economic synergies that have developed between China and the United States, not by accident, by design. The Chinese have ensured that the American economy becomes highly dependent on the Chinese economy, highly dependent. Virtually for anything you want to manufacture in the United States, trust me, the components will have to come from China. This was all designed by design. So it's a different game, and so the best place for India to be is to be equally close to both of them and not lean towards one or the other. And this is just, if you can imagine a simple analogy, if you can imagine a seesaw with two elephants, United States at one end and China at the other end, the best place for the third elephant to be is in the middle of the seesaw, because where the third elephant puts his toe or puts his foot, the seesaw goes that way. But you can only do that if you're in the middle. If you're not in the middle, you don't have that leverage. So the leverage for India increases exponentially when it stands in the middle of the seesaw. And this goes back to basic strategic thinking, going back thousands of years. And that's logically the position for India to be. And by the way, I'm very glad that at the meeting you mentioned in China, you can see very clearly that the China-India relationship is being repaired. Now, I do know that China and India will never become close friends. There's too much distrust. But that's never... In geopolitics, you don't go for friendship. You go for protecting your own interests. And India can best protect its interests by just working with both sides. That's the best thing you can do.
All right. Professor Kishore Mahbubani, as always, a pleasure, sir, for your time, your thoughts, your perspective, and for this fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for joining us on CNN News 18. Thank you.
My pleasure.